Hey YouTube, what's going on? It's Huncho here, back with another video. Today's video is going to be talking about the difference between low latency mode and the new NVIDIA Reflex feature in Fortnite. We are almost at 2,000 subscribers, so my next video will indeed be the NVIDIA Inspector Profile video with how to set it up and also a few more tricks to help boost your FPS and keep it more stable in Fortnite. So in today's video we're going to be comparing the input latency between low latency mode on when using NVIDIA driver 441.41 and when using the new driver with NVIDIA Reflex mode on with the boost. So you guys can have a good understanding of what I'm talking about, I'm going to explain how both of them work. So with low latency mode, when you turn the feature on, what you're doing is setting your pre-rendered frames to 1. What that means is when the game renders the image, your CPU processes that frame and then your GPU reads it. So when you turn this feature on, you're basically saying that your CPU can only prepare one image more than your GPU. The problem that this causes with some people with lower PC systems is that the CPU usage gets too high and that frame buffer isn't able to keep up because Fortnite is more CPU intensive, so it bottlenecks your system when your GPU isn't running at full speed because it doesn't have to work as hard to render the image. Putting the low latency mode on Ultra is supposed to get rid of the render queue completely, so that way when the image comes up on your screen, what's happening is your CPU has the first image of it, there's no extra render queue. So every image that comes up on your screen is the most up-to-date image because there's no buffer of a frame that might have been too late to get out because your GPU fell behind. This also added to the issue in Fortnite with your GPU not being utilized, and then the game would stutter because the CPU can't keep up with the game. So the purpose of NVIDIA Reflex was to allow the low latency mode to be implemented directly into the game, so that way it would reduce the CPU back pressure. This would allow you to have the ultra low latency mode without having the high CPU usage. The Reflex Boost feature allows the GPU to stay at a high clock speed even when you're CPU bound, which is huge for Fortnite. The faster speed that your CPU and GPU run at is the faster your image is going to appear on your screen and the lower latency you will have. While all this sounds good on paper, I wanted to put it to the test in Fortnite because when I updated my driver to implement NVIDIA Reflex, my game performance was significantly worse. I had more frame drops, and even though it seemed like my latency was lower of pressing the button directly on my keyboard, the image seemed more delayed and not as snappy on my screen. So while my method of testing isn't the most accurate, it provided accurate enough results to figure out the difference between low latency mode on and NVIDIA Reflex. The footage was shot at 1080p with 240 frames per second on an iPhone 8 Plus, so not the most ideal situation, but then it was slowed down in my recording software to 1% speed, which allowed me to have 1 second be equal to 2.5 milliseconds. I was actually really shocked by the results. So I took 12 shotgun shots into a wall on each driver because I figured 12 would be enough to see if there was a difference without wasting my time. With low latency mode on, I recorded the fastest input delay was 33 milliseconds and the slowest was 34.25 milliseconds from the time that my finger touched my mouse to the image appearing on the screen. The average turned out to be 33.5 milliseconds. This clip right here shows real-time speed of me clicking my mouse and the image appearing on the screen. This next one shows the speed it was recorded at in slow motion. And this last one is the speed that I took the clips from. As you can see, when my finger hits the mouse is when I started, and then the first image on the screen is when I stopped. When using NVIDIA Reflex, the lowest time was 33.25. and the highest time was also 34.25, while the average was 33.6 milliseconds, slightly higher than low latency mode. While these were virtually the same, I want to point out a distinction to which could only be for me and on my monitor, but I think it also has to do with how Fortnite is running with NVIDIA Reflex and how the game is not very consistent on that new driver right now. So what I found when using the 441.41 driver was the image popping up on my screen of the first pixels of the shotgun shot were normally very bright. There wasn't screen tearing at all, even though I'm not using G-Sync, and the image looked like this on the screen. Out of the 12 times, there was one screen tear, and twice that the image looked light like this. However, when using NVIDIA Reflex, 3 times I had screen tearing, and 5 images appeared very light on the screen. So while the input delay results were the same, the image was actually behind what it was on the 441.41 driver. I think that this issue becomes exaggerated when you're actually in-game with a changing frame rate rather than creative where you're just sitting at 240 frames, and that's why NVIDIA Reflex feels worse than your old driver. I know that my method of testing is not the most accurate, but I think it proved the point that I wanted to, was that 441.41 is still the better driver as of right now, rather than using NVIDIA Reflex. You're not going to gain any input delay reduction, and all you're going to get with the new driver is more inconsistent FPS and a worse overall gaming experience. I will revisit this again when there's a new update or a new NVIDIA driver, because I do think that implementing the low latency mode directly into the game will eventually make a big difference, but at least as of now, I would not use NVIDIA Reflex in the game, and I would still use a more stable driver because it's going to help with your system latency and it's going to give you a more consistent result, not only with your input delay, but with your FPS. So in my next video, I'm going to show how to install the 441.41 driver, which my profile is optimized for, how to properly uninstall your previous one first, and then also a few more tips that I've found along the way to help keep your FPS more consistent in-game, as well as slightly boost your FPS. I also just wanted to add to the end of this video that I do have a Discord down in the description where you can go and ask me questions, and there's a bunch of people already in there, some that can help you out with like a simpler problem as well. And it's just a positive environment in there to where we're all helping each other out with our computers and gaming. So feel free to check that out. And sometimes it's easier to reach me on there if you're commenting on a video that was from a long time ago and you're responding to something I said back to you, because I don't get the notification for that. Thank you guys for watching. Peace out.